Welcome contemporary music students to our little video presentation on note length and identifying some of the other musical symbols that are usually written down to help us understand what the point of the music is that's being conveyed to us, so that maybe we can convey to others, or that we can read music and enjoy other people's ideas. Unlike drawing or photographs or pictures on the wall, which are static, music is a temporal art form. It takes place over time. And so we need to have some way of representing that, and we came up with the idea of using a musical stave to place the notes on, depending on what pitch they are and how long they last. So we place notes on the treble clef, where they are located above middle C on the piano, and that can be right up into the high notes. Or if down on the left hand side of the middle C, we place the notes on the bass clef. Bass players may become familiar with playing notes in the bass clef. Now, pianists will be used to sing what we call the grand stuff, where we include both the treble and the bass clef, and there we've got all the notes that are located on that staff, including some that go above and below. But as you can see, in the middle there is middle C, which is the top of the bass clef and the bottom of the treble clef. So when we need to represent the lines or the notes that lie above or below the staff, we refer to them as ledger lines. And we can see some examples there below, going above the treble clef and also going below it, and also in the bass clef going above where we normally look at notes on the bass, and below. So the notes are placed on the staves according to their pitch. And it's useful to memorize the notes in the treble and the bass staves. And often over time we've come up with these mnemonics to help us remember them. So in the case of the treble clef, the notes that are on in the spaces can easily be remembered because they're called F-A-C-E, face. And on the notes that are on the line, E-G-B-D-F, every good boy deserves fruit. Moving to the bass clef on the left-hand side, A-C-E-G, that's ace with a G on the end. And the G-B-D-F or G-B-D-F-A, good boys deserve fruit always. Now we tend to place music inside bars along the staff. That helps us to recognize how long the little musical phrase lasts. Looking now at note duration, we're talking here about the length that the note is going to last once it's played. So the note that lasts 4 beats long is called the semibreve. We don't fill that note in when we write it, and it doesn't have a little stem. Half of that, again, which is known in the English system or UK system as a minim, is the half note. Now that is also not filled in, but it does have a stem, and it will last for the 2 beats. Moving on to our crotchets and quavers, of course, a quarter note in the American style system, or in the UK, crotchet. So here we have example of 4 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they will equal one whole note of 4 beats. So moving on, the 8th note down the bottom, known in the English system as the quaver, it not only has a stem, it has a little flag coming off, and that means it's going to last 8 of those are equal to one whole note, 8th notes. And a good example, a music teacher told me once, we think of the quaver notes as quivering a little bit, so they don't last as long, and the crotchet notes as crotchety, because they will last a whole crotchet beat. So now we're going to look at note duration here, the 16th notes. These are a little bit shorter again, so they have 2 flags, and we have 16 of them to equal 1 whole note, but 4 of them to equal a quarter note, etc., etc. And obviously we can look at this in a nice system here where it's laid out in a tree type format for us to see and recognize and become familiar with the different notations. And on this slide I've also given you a link which you might have to write down to a great theory page that goes into details about note duration. In addition to the notes, there's also the periods that are in between the notes, which are the rests, the places where we don't play, places where we take a little rest. And each of those has their own symbol, which is in the 3rd column here. We start with the whole note rest, which is kind of the upside down hat. Then we have the half note rest, which is a hat sitting above, going above. Our quarter note rests, we can see they will last for 1 beat or 1 count. And an 8th note, it just has one of those little teardrops, you might say, on them. And with the 16th note, I call it a little teardrop. There's 2 little teardrops on the 16th notes, which give us the quarter of a beat of a count. So in addition to the note length, we need to know about the time signature. That is, how do we play the song? What tempo are we going to be playing it in? And these time signatures are placed on the clef at the beginning of the piece of music to indicate, firstly, how long the bar is going to be, and the type of note that is going to be typically associated with that. So we express it usually as a fraction with the denominator at the bottom that defines the beat. And then on the top of it, we have the numerator, which tells us how many beats. So a really good example, a 4/4 represents 4 notes in 1 bar, but that bar is equivalent to 4 crotchets. Whereas in a 3/4, we're going to be still counting the amount of crotchets, but there's only going to be 3 of them in a bar. So some typical examples are included here, like the 4/4 meter, waltz time 3/4, march time 2/4, and then we have a compound type of sounds like 6/8, which is often used in ballads, but also Irish jigs. And then a slower type of groove used a lot in blues, our 12/8. So 1 bar of the 12/8 time signature will consist of 12 eighth notes. So it's useful to just Google some of these time signatures. You'll actually find examples of them on the internet. And there's plenty more on this link, musictheory.net/lessons. Plenty of really good ideas for understanding those musical notation signs. All right, so now we're moving on to what we call dotted notes, and this is where, in addition to having the spaces or a gap, sometimes a note is you're just gonna need it to last a little longer than what we thought. That we have from our basic notation. So if we add this little dot in front of it, it will increase its value by a half. And on this chart, you can see some examples of that. Another way that we can also extend the length of the note is by using a musical tie, and especially used if that note is going to really last beyond the bar length. The bar length is there to help us, assist us, but it's not always going to absolutely work to show us how long a note is going to last. So, and sometimes that last note is just going to extend across, and we use that tie to help show help us to extend the length of that note. Okay, now in our course earlier we looked at some charts that we can use to help understand the music, how it's going to be read. And here's a couple of typical symbols that we see in the charts. We have the double dots where we repeat what was in between. And we have the volta brackets where we have the first time round we do number 1, and then we can see we repeat it, and then the second time when we go to the second volta bracket and play what's in there. In this case, it's just the rest. Also, symbols that do occur include da capo or DC and dal segno or DS. And da capo means from the head. So in other words, if you see that symbol, you go back to the head. That's the beginning. Or dal segno, DS, it means go back to where you see a sign and then start playing from that point. At the bottom of the screen, you can see a link to a very good video which explains all these terms, especially the terms relating to reading charts. That really goes quite thoroughly through that concept. So hopefully you got something out of understanding the duration of notes in Western music and typical symbols that we see.